soul starts to linger, it's home I know. If you catch me daydreaming now and forever, thoughts are carrying me along to that place we call home. Down that long road, throughout life we roam. Whenever I go to that place I know it'll always be home, home to me.
La Malbaie, meaning a bad bay, is a name given by Champlain when one of his ships almost went aground at low tide back in the early 1600s. The irony in the name is that the area went on to become the cradle of the hospitality industry in the country. More recently, due to its unique climate and other natural characteristics, this region, called Charlevoix County, on the north shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, has been adopted into the global family of biosphere reserves. A world of contrasts, a blend of opposites. Mountains and sea, villages and farmland, interior woodlands, jagged coastlines, a gentle landscape carved from unforgiving ruggedness. Charlevoix is one of 6 areas in Canada to be designated a biosphere. The concept, started in 1970 by the United Nations, is to select unique regions of the world in order to study the impact of man. Lying east of Quebec City, the county contains many small urban centers. Here at Baie Saint Paul is where some of Canada's best painters, A.Y. Jackson, Jean-Paul Lemieux, Clarence Gagnon, interpreted now famous Charlevoix themes. Down the shoreline is Pointe-à-Pic, the main deepwater harbor for the region. Nearby, the community of La Malbaie is central to the region's 120-kilometer coastline. Work progresses on a replica of Le Pelican, a scourge of the English Navy in the late 1600s under d'Iberville's command. The 1,300-ton vessel will be anchored as an interpretive site in Montreal Harbor, the pride of naval architect François Courdeau. Called the road which moves by the native people, to early Europeans, the St. Lawrence was an uncharted corridor. Historian Philippe Dubé.
The first visitors of the Charlevoix area would be, and nothing is really sure at this point, but the Basque fishermen who went down the St. Lawrence River and to fish specifically belugas. But the first written account of this area is from Jacques Cartier himself in 1534. When he first passed in front of the Charlevoix County, he just noticed that there was a lot of belugas. It was rich, a very rich county with pines, with fish, as I told you, belugas and salmons. But it was far from Quebec City first, and no one would really want to live there. So it has a very slow beginning in its history and its development.
In the late 17th century, the huge seigneury of La Malbaie was created under the King of France and assigned to Philippe Gaultier de Comporte. The lack of natural harbors in the area required self-sufficiency. Timber, furs, farming, and the fishing of beluga whales provided an economic base for the sparse, isolated population. The study of man and his natural world goes on at Port-au-Saumon. Pierre Dansereau is an internationally known environmentalist.
I think that it's a very much interest to get away from the purely economic, historical aspect and try to stick to the degree of disturbance that has been introduced by man and the degree of success in actually exploiting the natural resources. The question would be, what have we done with water? What have we done with soil, with the forest? How efficient and renewable is our agriculture? What sort of building materials did we use? What were the reasons for the colonization of this area? Were they essentially of a religious, of a demographic, political nature? Or were they a spontaneous response to the call of natural resources waiting to be exploited?
Following the decisive battle between France and England at Quebec, Scots, historically related to the French through Norman ties, settled on this north shore. An antithesis of language and culture found fertile ground in Charlevoix.
When the English had their first government in 1763, James Murray, who was the governor, had the good idea of separating the seigneurie of La Malbaie, the old seigneurie of La Malbaie, and at the condition that the seigneurs that he was going to name had to live there.
Leaders of the 78th Fraser Highlanders who aided the British on the Plains of Abraham were rewarded. The seigneury of La Malbaie was divided between Captain John Nairn on the one side of the bay and Colonel Malcolm Fraser on the other. These founding fathers of Charlevoix's Scottish community became the driving force in the development of the county. Today, on the Fraser Seigneury, an old world ambience pervades. The estate is owned by the Cabot family, who have unbroken ties with the region spanning generations.
The reason we're here is because there were Empire loyalists in our American background who went back to England at the time of the Revolution and then emigrated to what was Lower Canada, Quebec. So we have family roots from the 18th century in Quebec. For many generations, we've spent as much as we can of our summers here. And I've spent every summer of my life except for World War II. And so our roots are really here more than anywhere else. And this goes for all generations of the family, the children and the grandchildren and everything. So I think that's generally true, where one's roots tend to grow in the summertime, and where you are in the summer is what you care about.
And what Francis Cabot cares about with a passion is the sublime beauty of the garden. The property, called Quatre Vins, is a showcase for nature at her best, accentuated by Charlevoix's climatic influences.
You can grow most things here better than you can further south because of the maritime conditions and the deep snow cover. In terms of perennial plants, the Himalayan primulas, exotic primulas that you just can't grow further south, thrive here and seed happily. The famous blue poppy from Tibet, Mechanopsis betanicifolia, which is one of the glorious plants and is just coming into bloom right now, loves it here. So you have a wide range of things you can grow that you can't grow elsewhere.
Where the Saguenay meets the St. Lawrence, feeding grounds attract a variety of whales in huge numbers, more so than any other place in the world. Robert Michaud has adopted these gentle giants.
It's difficult to be conscious of our impact on such a large environment as the St. Lawrence River or the ocean. Initially, we thought that we would never add any impact on the ocean. And the story about the whales tell us something completely different. We know now that some large whales have been put endangered, and now, since about 10 or 15 years, we start to realize that there is some more subtle problems with the whales that are not only associated with overexploitation, but strictly with pollution.
Et Daniel, il y a un groupe qui sort du Saguenay. On va les laisser dériver tranquillement. On va essayer une approche tantôt. C'est le deuxième groupe en arrière. Il faut complètement l'accélérer. OK, tu peux m'avertir s'il ressort, je vais m'installer sur la
Whales
caméra.
are an animal that lives maybe 90% of their time beneath the surface of the water. So we don't have access to this important part of their life. So what we are doing is to try to spend as much time as we can with the whale on the water.
Humpbacks, fin and blue whales, which can weigh in at 45 tons, along with the smaller belugas, no longer hunted, continue to attract visitors, greeting them just as they did in the beginning of the settlement here. The Laurentian interior appears to sweep across the open sea as if an infinite sky. By the early 1800s, the Charlevoix region, then a favorite to those who enjoyed the Nairn-Fraser hospitality, took on a new purpose. Upriver, the overcrowding of Quebec City left it vulnerable to epidemics of cholera and typhus.
People just panicked because it was terrible. And, a lot of people sick in the street. We just had to move, and Charlevoix was just a great place to be. The air was fresh, it was comfortable, and there was no typhus.
The seed of a sympathetic rapport between French-speaking rural and English-speaking urban people flourished in the soil of Charlevoix and remained perennial. The region embraced a world, an era, a society that clung to the values of recreation as a brushstroke in the art of living.
There was a very, very good spirit, very fraternal. People were so happy to see some strangers during the summer period because they were so isolated during the winter that tourists were just enthusiastic about how they were received. What just boomed all the summer resorting down there was the creation of the Manoir Richelieu, the first Manoir Richelieu in 1899. And the idea was just great, having all these boats that were going down doing the Saguenay trip. And the idea was just to have their own hotels, so people would live on the boats and would stay at the hotel for a little while and then get on the boat, but they were always in the Canada Steamship Lines network.
Numerous resorts, auberges, and later summer residences would multiply in the wake of the famous fleet of Bateaux Blancs. The summer population burgeoned with an influx of people from the Northeast United States, New York and Boston, as well as from Toronto and Montreal. At many of the same establishments welcoming today's visitors, there are few changes. The fusion of language and culture has provided many an anecdote and legend, some with a gentle touch of humor.
L'Auberge des Trois Canards is just an inn name because there were three doctors that put up that auberge. And in the area, they were saying that the three docks, les trois docteurs, the three docks. And the three docks became les Trois Canards because, of course, in French we say canard for ducks.
One summer resident who came to embrace the region would build what became known as the Summer White House, William Howard Taft.
Well, he came first, very, in a simple way with his family, and just fell in love with the country and built a house, and further on became president of the United States. And President Taft was saying that the air of La Malbaie was just like champagne, and it just got you, and without headaches or morning afters, was he saying. And so that's just give you an idea of how people was just in love with the place, and really were very, very, very enthusiastic about that fresh air and the people that were staying there with the old French tradition. All the social and cultural life of Charlevoix has maintained very, very long and old tradition.
This sequestered world hung on to the ways of old and sustained them, long after other regions had traded them for the modern. When ethnologist Marius Barbeau explored Charlevoix earlier this century, he uncovered a wealth of customs, the wearing of sabots or wooden shoes, one small example of a way of life that had virtually remained uninfluenced by industrialized society.
Non, on y croit. On devrait.
Carrying on business in the same facility that his father operated, Louis Riverin's work appeals to the aesthetics. The hammering of the blacksmith forge rings as a distant voice over the streets of La Malbaie. The county is a meeting place where past, present, and future are one.
Charlevoix was known for its geographical traits, which is the sea and the mountains, and that mixture of opposition, sea and land, English and French, urban and rural, always that extremes, which gives something very peculiar and specific.
It is the polarizing of these opposites which make it whole. A biosphere is a microcosm of all things living. It is mutually dependent, man and nature, struggling to achieve balance. It is Charlevoix. And as Laure Conan, the first French-Canadian female novelist, witnessed in her times, this self-evaluation goes on.
Well, I think there has always been a willingness of the people of this county to live with progress and to work with progress. They have been very future oriented. They're feeling that progress needs to be redefined, and that the old 19th century definition of progress is unacceptable because too much damage is being done to the environment, and therefore destroying the very resources upon which the progress is supposed to ride. So where does Charlevoix fit into this problem? Have we done better? Have we done worse? Do we have a program? The positive planning for not so only for a better world in abstract terms, but which world? How are we going to make it better? What do we really want?
What Charlevoix offered touched its first inhabitants. It is the impression, still understood in the collective consciousness, of those that have felt the gentle hand of the natural world.
Actually, we're starting something called Les Amis de Charlevoix to try and help preserve the countryside. This is started by the local community, and we all support it. And I'm very seriously thinking of starting a land trust as part of that, to try and preserve some of the key points here and get people interested in I think that's vital if we're going to preserve the quality of the countryside.
Many of the questions posed today can be answered in nature. The more we come to understand her, the more evident the solutions.
I think all the story of the beluga have been pretty useful to make us realize that all this fantastic and huge environment is fragile. And even if we don't see what is happening, we should be a lot more careful, think ahead. If we only react when we realize things, it might be a little bit dangerous for the future.
The Charlevoix saga, a world of contrast, opposites, harmony, appreciation, understanding.
You could always explain the success story of anything, I mean tourism for this subject, by all sorts of reasons, but I would say that there's some spirit there that you don't encounter all over. It's really something that is peculiar, and to the history of Canada, it is something, and it's a great lesson just to see two people, I mean the French and the English, getting along, and maybe why not using this example of understanding, of sharing human values to go a little further on and do a better country. I mean, in this little county, there's so much to understand that I think it's a good thing that we talk about it today, and it has to be known and must be known to all Canadians, I should say.